Dan, welcome to Talaera Talks. I'm very happy to have you here. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, excited to talk about the differences between cultures, which I've experienced. I'm sure you've experienced as well in the professional world.
Oh yeah, and yeah, we got to know you through your Instagram account. You have hilarious clips that we've actually shared internally a lot at Talaera because they are very funny, and a lot of them touch on the cultural differences, especially in work culture between the U.S. and in Europe. But before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Yes, I'm a stand-up comedian born in New Jersey, living in New York now. I've been doing stand-up for 9 years almost. Really enjoy live performance. Pandemic came around and was a huge disruptive force for everything. The one thing in the comedy world being just the explosion of comedy content on social media. I don't know if there's an art form that has been as radically changed by social media as comedy. I think maybe like dance as well.
Mm-hmm.
You think of how many young kids are dancing on TikTok and stuff. Comedy content has just really exploded since the pandemic. So yeah, kind of pivoted to social media content around 2021, doing live performance as much as I could throughout the pandemic. And then yeah, just kind of created a niche of making fun of corporate American life versus European corporate life. And yeah, that's kind of led to some international touring on my end, doing shows all across Europe, all across the US. So that is my background is pure comedy, no degrees in sociology or anthropology or the history of work studies or anything like that. So that is, yeah, that's, I think that's important for me to highlight is like I'm funny first, and then I've tried to learn as much as I can about different cultures and stuff, but comedy is kind of my main purpose.
Which is, it's a great way to bring down very abstract, sometimes concepts around cross-cultural differences into something that is very tangible and, of course, coming from humor, from a point of making people laugh. What is one clip or one sketch that got so popular, and why do you think it hit such a nerve?
Yeah, there was the first one that I did was the best one. I was experimenting with a bunch of different formats and stuff. And then I hit on, a comparison where the European is just saying like, you know, what should I do with my 178 vacation days this year? Kind of stressing out about it. And then cut to the American, and the American is frazzled, sprinting into the office saying, sorry, I'm late. I got hit by a car, but don't worry, I'll make it up. I'll work through lunch. Which, yeah, that was the biggest one. That hit a nerve. And I think, to your point about comedy and stuff, I think what rang true was just the vibe of it. Like and it was something that I was, naive about at the time, just trying to be funny. But I think I've seen it with my wife, who is a lot of international experience. She's an Australian. And so her perspective has been very vital in developing the series. But I've seen it amongst her friends in Europe, like when she was working in the UK, a stress, mild stress, but a stress about what should I do with my vacation days? How should I use them? That is very foreign to the US. So that vibe of just, my wife would be embarrassed about talking about how much paid time off she gets, kind of try and massage the truth a little bit when she talks to Americans, to say like, oh, it's not that much, it's public holidays, it's 28 days, like, just kind of. So that was on the European side. I think that was a novel idea of just highlighting that is a reality. There can be stress amongst Europeans for, what do I do with all this paid time off? From the American perspective, I think I got the vibe correct of the American as an individual without even a second thought saying, almost like, hey, I got hit by a car. I'll make it right. Don't worry about me. No concept of, like, he didn't go to the hospital. in the sketch. Like, there's no mention of, I'll be out for a couple weeks, I'll be out for a couple days. It's no, let me make this right immediately. I'll work through lunch. And that is a mindset of Americans, is I will sacrifice, health temporarily. I'll do it right now. We just got to get it done. Like, and that is, obviously everything exists on the spectrum, but I think a lot of Americans, people who work with Americans, a lot of Americans identified that as like, yes, that vibe is correct. An American will work beyond what they deem to be safe, and they might not even know the real sacrifices that they're making in the pursuit of that. So that was the kickoff of the series. It got a couple million views or whatever, tons of engagement. Americans in the comments like, you laugh, but this, like something similar happened to a coworker, something similar happened to me. And so I think that was a recognition of, this is an area that I can explore. And I was correct in that assumption, because here we are, I think 4 or 5 years later, and I still am finding like different things to compare. And the world is also changing as well. So viewing the world through that mindset, it's been a very rich source of material, for sure. As anybody who has spent 5 minutes in an international call will tell you, like, yeah, there's some differences. Like there's some misunderstandings. There's some, so that's kind of been that was the most successful one. And it, I think started momentum just in the larger domain of that comparison.
We'll add a link to it too in the comments. I know exactly which one you mean, and it is funny for sure. It's really funny. It's just the backdrop of it is also quite interesting. We'll dig a little deeper into the different cultural differences between the US and in Europe. But you mentioned that your partner, your wife's Australian, and that was part of the source of inspiration for you to do the series. Did you encounter any cultural shocks to yourself when you met her?
Yeah, so we met in 2015, and I think there are some differences. Obviously, it's, a relationship, you're learning about the other person, throw in 2 different countries, and I think there's more learning that needs to occur. A big thing was, kind of researching it and talking to her about, she has a PhD. She's so much smarter than me. And so, smart and empathetic and stuff. So we have had conversations about what we think that the major differences between the US and Australia is. And it's individualistic versus collective, right? There's some metric that ranks this, and it puts Australia and the US like close to each other in terms of, Australians value their individuality, Americans value their individuality. They rank similarly. And that is not our experience at all. I think there's a concept that my wife's pure Australian concept called tall poppy syndrome. Are you familiar with that concept?
Tell me a little bit more about it.
So the premise is, in a field of poppies, if one flower grows too high above the rest of the flowers, then it will be cut down to maintain the distance between the others. So you'll see, like, it's everything I say, of course, is in wild generalizations, but it's a phrase that is in Australia if they perceive somebody to be achieving too much or going beyond their, not achieving too much, but maybe, thinking that they're better than everybody else. Like there's a social balance to, like, all right, don't get ahead of yourself, like kind of view. That in America is non-existent. It is, we are all raised to be the greatest. You can do anything you want. You could be an astronaut, you could be an NBA player, you can be an NBA player in space. There is no limit to what you can achieve in terms of society telling you what you can or cannot do, probably to our detriment. I think we could use probably some tall poppy syndrome, but that was like the big one. That's the just celebration of success in America, and I think just a little bit of moderation of that on the Australian side. I don't think they're, chopping people down to say like, don't achieve anything, but it's, kind of like a, hey, pump the brakes. You're not that great. Which, yeah, I think is a fun kind of like dial on society that you can like turn up and down. So that was a big one. But yeah, I think the Australians that I meet, value family, community. There's just a really strong social safety net and, value for like physical activity and stuff. It's a really, I think, well adjusted and healthy country from what I can see. So taking my wife out of that and moving her to New York has been another culture shock, I think, as well.
How's she coping?
Good now. Yeah, there's only so many, interactions on the subway that you can have in a week before you're like, maybe not. Yeah, the, self kind of like advertising yourself, advocating for yourself in professional situations. I think Americans are just louder in that. So I think she's totally crushing it, killing it now. And yeah, I think it's a very difficult working environment. And I think she's doing incredibly well. There was for sure a learning curve up top of how to interact with Americans.
It's wonderful. And you talk a lot about stereotypes in the US and in Europe. What is one stereotype about the US that you think is actually true? And which one do you think it's a bit of an unfair stereotype, if you can think of any, about the US that you're like, that's actually not true?
Yeah, I think Europeans are correct in assuming like, just the American hustle culture. Like Europeans think that Americans work too hard. That is correct. Europeans are correct about the system in America as being hyper competitive to the detriment of physical and emotional health at some points. So Europeans are correct about that assessment of America. Within the system, I think there are people who share similar views of quality of life, work not being the end all be all, strong desires for, just avoiding burnout and things like that. So that is, yeah, I think Europeans can tend to paint Americans with a broad brush in terms of the value of hard work. It should also be said that hard work does not equal efficiency and hard work does not equal outcomes, which Americans have no concept of. Where like, if I break, it's just a series of brick walls that you have to throw yourself through. And then at the end of it, it's like, why does my body hurt? And it's like, well, because you kept pushing through. And so that's one. The system in America is hyper competitive and can be crazy. There are people who, can build situations for themselves where quality of life is valued, travel is valued, family time is valued, but that's not the norm, I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And it's also worth, also bringing up the US is a very big country. And even I live in Spain, and even in Spain, people from the north have nothing to do with people from the south. They're like totally different personalities. Of course, there's even individual personalities within the same communities. But in the US, when you go to California, it's nothing to do with people from New York or from Texas or from Florida or from Nebraska. So these differences is also something when we talk about American culture is a big bucket, but within the states there's also a lot of differences, right?
Yes. And it's kind of a choose your own adventure of, I think there's more diversity in, those different corporate or job vibes. Like, if you want to work in finance in New York, I know people who work until 3 a.m. Like that's a possibility. Like I have people who are in my life. Comedy is great because it's just so many diverse viewpoints and ages and origin stories and stuff. But yeah, people who would sleep on the toilet, just they'd go to the bathroom, they'd go to sleep for 15 minutes, and then they'd leave. Like the field of finance in New York, crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, insane. There are, industries that are way more laid back, that are, I don't know, of them off the top of my head because I feel like I always worked in sales or advertising and stuff, which is just different levels of crazy. So yeah, that's, I think to your point, it's you can find whatever you want. And I would encourage anybody in America who is in a field or in a company that it's like, oh, this doesn't seem healthy. And it's like, well, I am certain that in America there is a job for you somewhere that aligns with, whatever you value at this point in your life.
Great point. So it's not just geographical differences, it's very industry based. That's a really good point.
Yeah.
And so when we think about, and again, we're talking about general differences, and we always at Talaera, when we talk about culture, we always emphasize the idea of get to know the person, don't always assume, don't rely on stereotypes. However, stereotypes are general patterns that actually help us understand reality,
Mm-hmm.
in an easier way. So for those listening, so we have listeners all over the world, most of them outside of the United States. I think 80% of our listeners are outside of the United States. What does a typical work week in the US look like, and how does that
Mm-hmm.
compare to a typical work week in Europe, for example?
Yeah, I think there's, again, the title of the episode could be America is big and diverse. Like
Love it.
yes, it's bigger than you think. I know people who are like, hey, like in a day, I'll drive to Philadelphia and then I'll drive to Boston. And it's like, nope. Like, so yes, having said that, the experience of me and my family and people, like the Northeast, like a typical working day from the jump, the commute is going to be longer than it is in Europe on average. There are, the US has really not robust public transport. New York is different. I think New York is more of a European city than most people realize. Even having said that, like my parents lived in New Jersey. I lived in New Jersey, grew up there. Their commute in was an hour and a half,
Wow.
door to door, sometimes higher, 2 hours. And that's with robust public transport. That's like good, gold star American public transport is New Jersey getting into New York. So our commutes are going to be longer. We're going to be waking up earlier. This is all pre-COVID, obviously, but I talk about generalizations, start there. It takes on average longer for an American to get to the office. Lunch, culturally, not as important to Americans. So I'd say you're waking up earlier, you get into the office earlier. When lunch comes around, I'm sure that there's laws, worker protection, something in Europe married with the culture. And what starts what? Is it legislation that feeds the culture? Is it culture that feeds legislation? Absent in America, you're eating at your desk. There's nobody, this varies by field, but a view of food as fuel, get it into my body. It's a math problem, calories for brain. Like, so that's these generalizations, but I think that that's like helpful to think about. The no federally mandated paid time off. It varies by company, varies by state. In the EU, from what I understand, there are, 28 days seems to be a magic number that is enforceable across industries, across countries and stuff. Obviously, this is gross generalizations, but that's the fundamental truth. The government cannot tell companies how long to give their employees off of in the private sector. So an American work week is going to be more monotonous. They're going to bleed into each other. Time is going to go faster because there's less paid time off. Federal holidays, less of those, and even variation in which ones Americans can take. For example, Martin Luther King Day. Some companies get it fully off. Schools get it off. Some companies do not get it fully off. Memorial Day is similar. So in an average American workspace, we'll have anxiety baseline very low, but like, what does this year look like? Are they going to give us the Friday off before Memorial Day? If MLK Day, it always falls on a Monday, like 4th of July is variable. Where does that fall? How will you know, the time in between New Year's and Christmas work out? Because if they both fall on weekends, what days will we get off in between? So yeah, I think those are like larger thing, and there is variety within that. I think like summer Fridays, sometimes you can companies will give you a Friday off, or you can leave the office on Friday. This is all, I'm sure a lot of these metrics are pre-COVID in terms of remote work and stuff, so there's more variability there, but those are the rules of the game. We're all playing with those rules. I would say generally more anxiety and uncertainty about paid time off, where it's coming from, and just larger stressors in terms of longer commutes, and I think just less federal protections for employees. That can produce pretty crazy results. You can make, like, occasionally it will make Steve Jobs. Like, it's a system that can also produce the Serena Venus Williams is of the world, Michael Jordan. Like, that type of mindset can produce greatness, and it has a cost, I would say, that, for the rest of us who are not Michael Jordans, can be difficult to navigate.
But it does show both sides of the coin, because yes, you're totally right that the stressors are different from most parts of Europe, potentially on average. But then you do get that mentality where you get a lot of growth, and you can get a lot of innovation and faster, scientific findings, which is also positive, just so that we can also show the
Yes.
nice, I guess, side of things.
Yes. Growth, like constant growth, and the growth it allows for, if you're a guy or a woman who comes up with an idea for an app that automates one element of a financial transaction or something like that, like, you can become a billionaire. Like, there are, people, like, the potential for disruption, innovation, change, it's unlimited. There's so much potential for, if you can just change the way that everybody does one small thing, then, you're talking about like really, really big change that can permeate to the ends of the earth, for good and bad. Sometimes those changes are disastrous, but that's exciting. There's an energy in New York of a lot of people who are, running around and trying to do something.
Mm-hmm. And you just came back from Europe. I saw one of your most recent clips of you in Madrid. What are some things that you found interesting there in terms of cultural differences?
Yes, my body is from Madrid, I believe. Like, I go to sleep very late. I wake up very early. I've always been that way. So just from like a circadian rhythm, like, I think I was meant to be born in Madrid. I cannot believe the amount of very deep conversations that are happening at cafes. It is always like 2 or 3 people locked in on the deepest conversation that you've ever, and I don't speak Spanish, so like, it could just be like, God, I wish you'd get a haircut or something. But like, the cafe culture is just incredible, and I am so jealous of it. Just the ability to, kind of like open-ended, like, I'll go to the cafe and we'll see. Yeah, I love Madrid. Talk about places in my life that I've been to that I could like see myself living in, and Madrid is like very close to the top of the list. Incredible food, obviously. The people are so nice. But yeah, I'm a sucker for a cafe. You get me a good seat at a cafe with a waiter who maybe forgets that I exist. That's the dream for me.
You brought up cultural differences, big cultural difference between the U.S. and Spain, that the waitress or waiter may forget that you're there. Have you seen any specific differences when you go to a restaurant in the U.S.
Yeah.
or in the parts of the U.S. where you have the most experience, and in Madrid, for example?
Yeah. Again, like, New York is its own. Somebody was like, somebody came up to me and said that they think I'm not an American, I'm a New Yorker. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. So like New York is its own. New York is everything about America on steroids. But I was out to eat with family and some friends, out of town friends that we had, and we were at a restaurant, really nice place. We're eating, and as the meal progresses, we finish the meal, and the waiters just keep coming over and like they'll take a cup away, they'll take a plate away. Oh, are you guys using this? Take as long as you want. Take as long as you want. We are going to make you feel like you need to leave, but take as long as you want. That I think one of the people that we were with was from the UK, and they were like, "This would never happen." Just the soft, pressure to like leave a place. I think European meals are more, open ended. Specifically Spain. You get a good, and that like can be good, can be bad. Like in New York, especially, there's an assumption that you're going somewhere else. You go to the meal, maybe you got a Broadway show. I mean, if you try to eat dinner, if you go to a restaurant near Broadway, the waiters will ask you, what time is your show? At the
Mhm.
beginning, like, here's the specials, any water, what time is the show that you're trying to get to? So that is, Americans are respectful of those times to an almost militant level of like, we got to turn this over. You got to get out of here. Like, I'm doing this for you and I'm doing this for us.
Mhm.
So that is, yeah, it's a conveyor belt. And the conveyor belt, there's some, that's how cars are made, like conveyor belts are good, like automation and efficiency is good. Some of the best meals I've ever had in my life are in New York, but I don't, the conversation is less important. The ambiance is, if you move your chair back, you're hitting a second person behind you, and you could be next to somebody on an awkward first date, and you're so packed in with each other, and it can really be a tough situation. I'm sure that happens in Spain as well, but yeah, I think I'm rambling a little bit, but the goal of a comedian is always like, I think it I think that's the vibe. Like, I think if I can get the vibe correct, then people can be like, yeah, you're mostly there. So yeah, it's the New York restaurants are a conveyor belt.
I actually here in Spain, you're totally right. I've been living here for a while now, and when you try and book for restaurant, sometimes they'll just have one shift for the whole night,
Hmm.
and whenever that table is free, then they'll give it up to anyone who walks in. But it's very rare to actually have like two different. I know in many places outside of Spain, or especially in the US, you get an hour or an hour and a half to eat,
Correct.
and
Yeah.
then you have to go, and then you would have like maybe 7, and then the next one would be at 8:30, and you know that there's another table before that or after that. And here in Spain, it's I think restaurants are shifting a little bit more towards that, but in general, you
Mhm.
don't have a limit, so you can just eat and spend 3 hours, 4 hours even after lunch. So that's a big change. When I go to the States, I go there fairly often. That's always a big shift.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously, I think some criticisms that people give me of my work online is like, oh my God, it's too Eurocentric. Like, it's too positive towards Europe. And I'm like, yeah, that's obviously in comedy. You can't like context, give broader context. For me to caption or fit all of that information in, it's not funny to be like, actually, this is just like my specific experience, blah, 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 blah. Like, disclaimers don't exist in comedy, but I don't believe that either system is better. I think, if you're with 5 of your best friends who you haven't seen in a while, like 4 hours is, just an awesome, incredible time. If you're with people who you don't like, and you want to get it in and out, if you're with, if it's double date and one of the partners is a dud, like, keep it
Then
to
you
under 90 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. Keep it to 60 minutes. Why not? But yeah. So different, there's benefits to both. And yeah, I don't think I'm pro Europe or pro America. I think it's, what are, yeah, they're different systems. It'd be crazy to be like, Europeans are right about everything. It's like, no, that's clearly
Absolutely.
not. Like, yeah.
I agree. And it's an important disclaimer. What is when So when we think about the different systems in the US and in Europe and talking about broader terms, we've talked about some differences also more in like personal life. What does that translate to when it comes to meetings, meeting times, punctuality, small talk?
Mhm.
Have you discussed any of these differences? Have you seen any yourself?
Yeah, this is, I think, a generalization that I can feel confident about is I think Americans there's less fluff in an email. They are getting right to the point. Probably, I think there would be a higher emphasis in America on responsiveness. When did you get this? I saw that you read it, but you didn't respond. And again, not necessarily better. I think the amount of times that I can think of communications where, a boss gives me a piece of work, I go full steam ahead, don't ask any follow-up questions. And then either I make a mistake or the boss comes back and says, I gave this to you too soon. We didn't, the situation is completely different now and all of the work was done in vain. That, and then, talk about vibes. That has more of like an American vibe to it, like speed, and speed is not always efficiency. I'd say, yeah, it's probably is less of a relationship than most people would expect. Like, you know, if we got it done fast, like who knows if that was the most efficient way. Like there's a saying, it was somebody in the US Navy or something, but adopted it as like a maxim of like slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Hmm?
I don't think Americans value that always in communications specifically. Like send out a Slack, hey, ignore that. I'm working through it. Like, just I think we're quicker trigger on the messaging. And I think my wife, would vouch for that as well. Which, yeah, I don't think is necessarily, I think talk about even me saying like fluff is kind of derogatory. I think like there's no niceties. Even niceties is a little derogatory. Like those are the only things that humans are on earth to do, I think, is to connect with other people and build community and stuff. And I'm just talking about it as if it's like, the sign off on an email, like as if it's optional or something. But it's, yeah, I don't think that's something that Americans value as much, and to our detriment, I think.
I think it's a little bit when we started talking about cultural differences, you talked about individualistic cultures and collectivist cultures, and you said that the
Hmm.
U.S. was more of an individualistic culture, and it's the values, right? In the U.S., there's the environment is a little bit more or it is more competitive, so you have to stick up for yourself, and that's part of the culture, and so you value achievement versus
Hmm.
in places like Australia, and it also happens in many parts of Asia. People value group harmony and being all together and caring for others. The other dimension that I think we're now talking about is how people build trust. And
Hmm.
in countries like the US, trust is based on tasks. You being
Yes.
efficient, you delivering on time, you showing your credentials, like the things that you've actually done. And in other parts of the world, Spain is one of them, some parts of the Middle East as well. Trust is based on relationships. So there's a lot of small talk and it takes longer. Maybe it takes more meetings to get to actually build that trust. And it takes going for lunch
Hmm.
together. So it's a lot of time you spend as a human. And that's just as you said, that it's no better or worse, but that is how people build trust. And so for a meeting, for example, if it happens in some parts of Europe, then it is expected to spend time getting to know the person and
Hmm.
understanding what their life is like and what they're going through and their concerns. In the US, for example, it could be there's a little bit of chit chat at the beginning, but it's a little bit more superficial, and then we're done after 3 minutes, and then we go down we get down to business. That's more efficient short term.
Hmm.
But when you think about what people actually value, there's the saying of if you're gonna go fast, go alone. If you're gonna go far, you
Hmm.
go together or something like that.
Yeah.
So Yeah, I think it's just important to understand what do people value and then support that to the extent that it's possible.
Yes. Yeah, that is, I think in America, like a question, picture like a meeting, you get into the meeting room, somebody goes like, how are you doing? It's like, well, do you really want to know? If we got to get like, good, could be better, like Americans almost have a script of like, oh, Mondays, like weather out the, we all have like those phrases because you're not actually expected to say like, oh, actually, glad you asked. My marriage is in shambles. Like there is, yeah, we all have like a script of like, you are asking how I'm doing. Here's the, I know this line. Boom, there you go. Mondays, man. Let's keep it going. Which, yeah, is probably good for getting the meeting done on time. But yeah, that's you sacrifice some things, I think, in the brevity of the communication.
Yeah, and when we don't know that much about the other culture, the a very common outcome of that is this vision of us versus them, or we are this way, they are that way. But is there a way, in your opinion, that we can build empathy and that instead of saying, "Oh yeah, it's they do it this way," we could say, "Oh yeah, I get it. I get where they're coming from." How can we build
Mhm.
that sort of empathy?
Yeah, I would say that empathy is built with authenticity. Like you might not be able to, like these systems are so ingrained. There's so many people, there's so much weight in trying to change things for the better. So I think, kind of like where like micro things that you can do, you can always control how you express yourself. So I think if you go into a situation knowing yourself, being authentic to you and sharing that experience. Obviously, maybe you don't do it in the middle of a meeting like, "Hey guys, it's siesta time. Like I gotta, head out." But authenticity to coworkers, to people who you can trust of like, "Hey, there's a deadline coming up. This is, I value family. I've got a kid. They've got ballet class. I can do it this one time, but in the future, these are, to live my authentic self. Like I pride myself in being a good parent. So sharing that gives them, then the other person the opportunity of like, that's great. Like you value that. I'm a single person. Like I'm in America. Like I can, I have Friday nights. I don't value Friday nights really. I'd rather, like working on Friday nights is not as big of a deal for me because, the society that I'm in is, bars don't open until 9 anyway, like because everybody's working until 9. So that's, yeah, what, thinking practically is like never be afraid to be authentic, figure out what your values are and make sure that the people in your team know what your values are. Like I wrapped up a job. I'd been there for 5 years. And at the end of it, found out that somebody on my team had 2 kids. Didn't even know it was one kid. And it's twice as many kids as I thought. Not that like what a valuable piece of information that could have been. How many other situations, if I'd had that information, like could have helped him more, could have alleviated his pain or pain points that he was experiencing. So yeah, know, write down your values. Like everybody's values are different. And then, try and get people to articulate their values. It might get them, to jog their brain about what they think their values are. Maybe write down what you perceive their values to be. It might be wrong, might be right, but yeah, everybody's working. All you can know is what is true to you, and just getting that across in a way that's, I think it opens the door for other people to state their values then. And then yeah, I think differences in working style and opinion are difficult in the short term and great in the long term. Like, you need people. I think of like just on a basketball court, there's a guy who's 7'3", and then there's a guy who's 5'10". Like, it would be insane to be like, we need a team of all 7'3" people. It's like, no, that would be very bad. So yeah, just all is yourself. Try to know yourself, and then let people know who you are, and then they can, respect your boundaries or violate them. And now this is somebody who is in direct violation of my values. Like, I got to get out of here.
Right. Like understanding what truly is valuable to you is a great first step. And sometimes I don't think it's that much about these are my rules and you either follow them or not, right? I think it's much more
Mhm.
about this is where I'm coming from. This is what's important for me. Is there a way we can design an environment where we can both thrive, we can both have our piece of the cake, so to say, so to
Yes,
speak?
exactly. It would be, yes. You make a very important point, because it'd be insane to go to your boss and be like, actually, Fridays are me days. So yeah, that is, yes, I think you make a very important distinction. They're not like hard and fast rules, but it's information sharing, and now do whatever you want with that information. Now you know who I am. We can be, you can help me, you can hurt me, you can sometimes help me, sometimes hurt me, but yeah, now all I can do is give you that information, and then it's up to you how you react to it.
Right. And then talk through it and see if there are ways where you can actually adjust so that everyone gets what they need
Mhm.
most of the time, at least.
Yes.
Um, one last question, and I could talk about this topic forever, but
Mhm.
we're wrapping up soon. If you could pick one cultural trait from each side to combine them into a better system, what would be one thing that you would take from Europe and one thing would you keep from the US?
Yes. I think Miss, okay, I will be very careful in how I say this. I think there's some, I think everybody could use a dose of American exceptionalism, right? Like, I think especially in my field in comedy, the level of delusion required to say that one day I will be in a room where people will pay to hear me talk is insane. But it's also, you know, necessary. You need to be delusional when you start. And I think that there are elements of American exceptionalism that like get, obviously there are terrible consequences of too much American exceptionalism, but just confidence in the face of not a ton of evidence is useful when you're starting something, when you're beginning something. That is very important. If you are trying to, change careers, or you're trying to start an art form, like borrow some American exceptionalism, be like a bald eagle, jump out of the nest, like keep it. It's like diesel fuel. It burns very hot, but it's useful in small doses. That is what I'd say. I think we could all benefit from that. And then I think like the European side, I think we talked about it a little bit, but just slowing down for an open-ended meal or open-ended activities. Like, I don't, I think long dinners, long lunches, you know, walks, like, I think those are things that like Europeans value a lot. Is, that this dinner is going to last however long it
Mhm.
lasts. Do that. I think that there's benefits to it, downsides to it. You don't want to do like something like that every single week, build in 3 hours of dinner and stuff like that. But like cafe culture,
Mhm.
I wish that was more prevalent in America. More seats. I mean, you walk around like Paris, and it's the amount of chairs per capita. It's like there are more chairs, there are more cafe chairs in Paris than there are humans. Like, yeah, I think I wish in America that there were more spaces with like open ended timelines, or, yeah, that's something that every time I go to Europe, I'm just like, dude, it is slower. The service is slower. I walk slower. That is, yeah, that's just the open. I think European, it's just kind of more like open ended experiences. I think American experiences are more finite just from a time perspective.
And faster.
Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Dan. This was very interesting. I laughed and I loved hearing your experience as well. Where can people find you?
Instagram is the place that I spend the most time at, Dan Pulzello. And then, yeah, follow me. And if you want to watch me perform live, I'm always touring in different places. So, yeah, Instagram is the best place to find out about all that.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on the show. It was lovely to have you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Paula. Ditto.